Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel and welcome to this video in which I will be discussing how we can integrate our unconscious according to Carl Jung. So in the previous video, which I will link somewhere on your screen, I've already discussed the importance of the unconscious. So Carl Jung argued that our unconscious is a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, if it is not integrated, it will have an overwhelming power over our ego and thereby limit our free will. On the other hand, if we succeed in integrating our unconscious, then the unconscious can serve as a powerful compensating force. Carl Jung further argued that every individual can make his or her own choice in accepting the need to become aware of one's unconscious mind. So he wrote, for example, if he voluntarily takes the burden of completeness on himself, he need not find it happening to him against his will in a negative form. However, as discussed in my previous video as well, if an individual does not recognize the importance of the unconscious, this can have some serious negative consequences. And according to Carl Jung, these negative consequences do not only impact the individual, instead they can have a negative influence on the world in its entirety. So as a result, I think we can conclude that integrating our unconscious can be a worthwhile effort, and Carl Jung also called this process of making unconscious forces conscious individuation. And how we can integrate our unconscious and succeed in the process of individuation will be the question that I will try to answer in this video. And for this discussion, I've mainly focused on the two books written by Carl Jung, which I believe to be the most important in this regard, which are the Red Book and Aeon, which are really interesting books to read in any case. So, yeah. Before we begin, I have to mention that throughout this video I will use the terms the soul and the unconscious interchangeably. I will not make a distinction between both terms because, according to Carl Jung as well, becoming aware of one's unconscious is similar to becoming aware of one's soul, as well as the other way around. So I think we can see this because the German word which Jung used in this regard, Seele, is in English usually translated into the word soul. It can, however, be argued that the term Seele encompasses a lot more than merely the soul, and it's rather hard to find a correct translation for this word. As a result, it is useful to look at the definition that Jung gave of Seele and the soul. For Jung, soul entailed a lot more than the term suggested at first as well. Besides the unconscious, the soul, according to Carl Jung, serves many different functions. He wrote, I, your soul, am your mother, who tenderly and frightfully surrounds you, your nourisher and corrupter. I prepare good things and poison for you. I am your body, your shadow, your effectiveness in this world, your manifestation in the world of the gods, your effulgence, your breath, your odor, your magical force. So I believe that this definition provided by Carl Jung illustrates that the unconscious is a part of the soul and that most of the activities of our soul occur unconsciously. So becoming familiar with our unconscious is not really an easy process, and as you may have noticed from the definition of the soul provided by Carl Jung as well, not only positive forces reside within our unconscious or within our soul. Our soul is in part a corrupter, a shadow, and a poisoner. So what you might find when you venture into the depths of your unconscious might horrify you, making it quite hard to move forward. And at the same time, many temptations might lure us away from our path. And Carl Jung wrote, you dread the depths, it should horrify you, since the way of what is to come leads through it. You must endure the temptation of fear and doubt, and at the same time acknowledge to the bone that what you fear is justified and your doubt is reasonable. How otherwise could it be a true temptation and a true overcoming? Moreover, besides becoming frightened of what we might find, Carl Jung believed that during this process of familiarizing ourselves with our unconscious, we might believe that we are heading in the wrong direction. And this is the case because we will be met with chaos and a lack of meaning. This is, however, normal according to Carl Jung, because chaos belongs to the world just as much as order does. He wrote, "How hard is fate? If you take a step towards your soul, you will at first miss the meaning. You will believe that you have sunk into meaninglessness, into eternal disorder. You will be right. Nothing will deliver you from disorder and meaninglessness, since this is the other half of the world." Fundamentally, according to Carl Jung, we should carefully investigate the aspects of ourselves that we might dislike or that might scare us to some degree. They are just as much a part of us, except they might have been suppressed because we ourselves or our environment might not have liked them. And Carl Jung also proposed some practical ways in which we could become familiar with these less favorable aspects of ourselves, which he also called the shadow. And I will discuss these more practical exercises at the end of this video as well. So, besides allowing disorder and meaningless to come into our lives for the purpose of finding out more about our unconscious, Carl Jung also argued that it is of crucial importance that we find the right balance between consciousness and unconsciousness. He argued that if we are too conscious, then unconscious characteristics might be neglected, and if we are too unconscious, however, we might not have a sufficient footing in the world. So therefore, he argued that the first step to integrating our unconscious is finding out whether we are the master of our unconscious world or whether our soul or our unconscious controls us. He wrote, "If you believe that you are the master of your soul, then become her servant. If you were her servant, make yourself her master, since she needs to be ruled. These should be your first steps." I'm not a psychiatrist, of course, but I believe that most people are probably too conscious. And this can be problematic because, as argued by Carl Jung, unconscious forces might then take control suddenly in a dangerous fashion. And we should therefore find the right balance, meaning that for most people we should focus more on our unconscious world. He wrote, "The world of consciousness must now be leveled down in favor of the reality of the unconscious. Room must be made for the dream at the expense of the world of consciousness." In more practical terms, this means that we should carefully consider our character traits and see where we might be out of balance. Carl Jung used conscientiousness as an example. So individuals that are extremely conscientious might attempt to let go a bit more, thereby consciously losing some control and as a result giving away some control to one's unconscious. Carl Jung wrote, "It is not a question, as one might think, of relaxing morality itself, but of making a moral effort in a different direction. For instance, a man who is not conscientious enough has to make a moral effort in order to come up to the mark. While for one who is sufficiently rooted in the world, through his own efforts, it is no small moral achievement to inflict defeat on his virtues by loosening his ties with the world and reducing his adaptive performance." The same can be illustrated with the example of two other character traits as well, which are thinking and feeling. Carl Jung observed that some people prefer to think, which can make it difficult for these people to really enjoy life. He wrote, "Some love thinking and establish the art of life on it. They practice their thinking and their circumspection, so they lose their pleasure. Therefore they are old and have a sharp face. And others prefer to feel, which might make them a bit too reckless." Carl Jung wrote, "The others love pleasure. They practice their feeling and living. Thus they forget thinking. Therefore they are young and blind. Those who think base the world on thought, those who feel on feeling. You find truth and error in both." So yeah, do you know to which category you belong. This overemphasis on either thinking or feeling can be problematic and is relevant to our present discussion on the integration of the unconscious, because those individuals that think too much can push their feeling into their unconscious, while those that feel too much can push their thinking into their unconscious. Carl Jung wrote, "He who prefers to think than to feel leaves his feeling to rot in darkness. It does not grow ripe, but in moldiness produces sick tendrils that do not reach the light. He who prefers to feel than to think leaves his thinking in darkness, where it spins its nets in gloomy places." Because either thinking or feeling remains underdeveloped, someone who feels does not trust his or her thinking, while someone who thinks does not trust his or her feeling. And although one does therefore not pay any attention to either thinking or feeling still exists within the unconscious, and embracing the aspect that one has neglected is therefore, according to Carl Jung, an important step towards the integration of one's unconscious. He wrote, which I think is a really nice quote, "May the thinking person accept his pleasure, and the feeling person accept his own thought. Such leads one along the way." Another important aspect for this discussion, which I've also discussed in the previous video, is the importance of myths and mysteries. So another really interesting author, Joseph Campbell, who was inspired by Carl Jung a lot as well, observed that myths serve an important role as a bridge to the unconscious. Although myths are not true in the usual way in which the term is used, they are true in a different way. They can have an important function as a metaphor, thereby illustrating a much deeper truth compared to what we are able to comprehend at first. And Carl Jung indicated this importance of myths as well. He argued that myths, like religions and fairy tales for children, can be used to better understand unconscious events. This is the case because they symbolize events that cannot be consciously grasped. We need a symbol or a metaphor in order to understand them. He wrote, "That is why it's so extremely important to tell children fairy tales and legends, and to inculcate religious ideas into grown-ups, because these things are instrumental symbols with whose help unconscious contents can be canalized, consciousness, interpreted and integrated. In our scientific age, in which almost everything is scrutinized by science, symbolic ideas have become largely neglected." Carl Jung wrote, "With the loss of symbolic ideas, the bridge to the unconscious has broken down. Instinct no longer affords protections against unsound ideas and empty slogans. Rationality without tradition and without basis in instinct is proof against no absurdity." And this all is problematic because we have, as a result of this development, lost an important bridge to the unconscious. And in order to integrate our unconscious, it might therefore be worthwhile to become familiar with some of the myths that have been so inspirational to our ancestors. We might learn that we are not that different, and that the ideas which we now believe to be false might be true after all, albeit in a different way. And reading the works of Carl Jung as well as Joseph Campbell can help us familiarize ourselves with these ancient ideas. Another important reason why it is hard to connect with our unconscious, according to Carl Jung, is because we are directing our attention solely to the external world. In order for us to connect with our soul, Carl Jung argued that we should direct our attention inward to the world of the soul. He wrote, "The soul has its own peculiar world. Only the self enters there, or the man who has completely become his self. He who is neither in events nor in man, nor in his thoughts." If we turn our attention inwards, Jung observed that we might find that the world of our soul is a desert, and it is up to us, by directing our creative energies inwards, to fertilize the land of the soul. Carl Jung wrote, "If your creative force now turns to the place of the soul, you will see how your soul becomes green and how its field bears wonderful fruit." And Carl Jung believed that it could take, quite a long time for the fertile lands of our soul to become green. And waiting for these fertile lands to become green might be too long for some individuals. However, if one then throws him or herself back at the external world, he or she will forever remain a subject to the external world, and the process of individuation has failed. Carl Jung wrote, "Since then it will have been clearly proven that this man is incapable of enduring beyond things, men and thoughts, and they will hence become his master, and he will become their fool, since he cannot be without them, not until even his soul has become a fruitful field." Jung also stressed that this does not mean that by directing our creative forces inwards, that we should be neglecting our external world. Instead, it means that we will not be dependent upon the external world. He wrote, "He whose soul is a garden needs things, men and thoughts, but he is their friend and not their slave and fool." In relation to the discussion on the external and internal world, it is interesting to analyze how we behave in both worlds as well. So usually we set intentions for who we want to become or what we want to achieve, in particular in the external world. Carl Jung observed, however, that our intentions might in fact limit us. He wrote, "How little we still commit ourselves to living. We should grow like a tree that likewise does not know its law. We tie ourselves up with intentions, not mindful of the fact that intentions is the limitation, yes, the exclusion of life." And the same applies to the moment at which we try to familiarize ourselves with our unconscious. We go in with an intention and a certain desired outcome. However, these intentions might limit us in what we might discover. Carl Jung wrote, "We believe that we can illuminate the darkness with an intention and in that way aim past the light. How can we presume to want to know in advance from where the light will come to us?" Instead, Carl Jung suggested us to trust the process and let our unconscious guide us, instead of us guiding ourselves with certain intentions and preconceived ideas of what we might find. He wrote, "I am stunned, but I want to be stunned. Since I have sworn to you, my soul, to trust you even if you lead me through madness. How shall I ever walk under your sun if I do not drink the bitter draught of slumber to the lees?" Well, up until now it might be difficult to define what Carl Jung really believed we should do to integrate our unconscious. It has, however, become even clearer, I believe, how important this process can be for us. Not only for our well-being, but for just the knowledge of ourselves as well. But what are practical ways in which we can achieve this integration? Well, before we begin by discussing these practical ways, it is important to note that Carl Jung did not intend to teach us about any particular way in which we should integrate our unconscious. He stressed the importance of this journey and he shared his own experience with us, but he never intended to teach us about a particular way. He wrote, "It is no teaching and no instruction that I give you. On what basis should I presume to teach you? I give you news of the way of this man, but not of your own way. My path is not your path, therefore I cannot teach you." He indicated, however, that each one of us has a certain way or path that he or she can follow, for which we do not need any external teachings or ideas. He wrote, "The way is within us, but not in God's, nor in teachings, nor in laws. Within us is the way, the truth, and the life." So of course the way is also not in YouTube videos or anything like that. We can, however, use Carl Jung's idea to define how we can best set up integrating our unconscious. And I believe that the most important theme that is presented throughout most of Jung's work, and which is also very much present in his own journey, is that we should turn our creative energies inward. And how we do so is largely up to us. Carl Jung practiced this through active imagination and automatic writing, which would later also be an important source for the material for the Red Book as well as the Black Books. And whether we want to engage this process through active imagination, meditation, or whichever other method one might prefer, it might still be important to pay attention to the ideas that I've discussed in this video. It might be important, for example, to not set any intentions because they might actually limit us too much. It can further also be important to embrace order and chaos during this process because they are both equally a part of us. And moreover, it can be of interest to explore the other side of our character traits, because we might have expelled to our unconscious to a significant degree. So as I discussed, if you're extremely conscientious, for example, it might be interesting to arrive late at an event or a meeting and then observe what happens. Carl Jung wrote, "The way of life rides like the serpent from right to left and from left to right, from thinking to pleasure and from pleasure to thinking. Thus the serpent is an adversary and a symbol of enmity, but also a wise bridge that connects right and left through longing, much needed by our life." So yeah, that was quite a long discussion, and I hope you're still with me. And that already brings us to the conclusion. So in a previous video, I've also discussed the two dimensions that Carl Jung believed to exist. The first one is the spirit of the times, and the second one is the spirit of the depths. So the spirit of the times can be explained as the dimension in which we live. We go to school, we go to work, we follow the law, and we think we know who we are and what we want. And the spirit of the time is always changing its form, and it is in no way constant. The world changes, we ourselves change, laws come into being and they disappear again, laws are thought, values change, and time goes on. So in this dimension, everything that happens can be explained quite easily. Everything can also be rationalized. The spirit of the depths, on the other hand, is eternal and everlasting. It does not change, it encompasses all that has ever happened and also all that will ever happen. It does not attach value, it does not judge or objectify. And from this, Carl Jung wrote, "From this we learn how the spirit of the depths considers the soul. He sees her as a living and self-existing being, and with this he contradicts the spirit of this time, for whom the soul is a thing dependent upon man, which lets herself be judged and arranged, and whose circumference we can grasp." So the soul and our unconscious belong to the latter dimension, so the spirit of the depths. And it is up to us to create a bridge between these two dimensions and thereby integrate the unconscious aspects of ourselves that reside in this other dimension. And in order to do so, Carl Jung proposed that we should turn our creative energies inwards. And we do not have to do so continuously, we can just continue to live our lives within the spirit of the times. However, whenever we have a moment to ourselves, we might explore the depths and, well, see what we might find. So to conclude, Carl Jung wrote, "To live oneself means to be one's own task. Never say that it is a pleasure to live oneself. It will be no joy but a long suffering, since you must become your own creator. If you want to create yourself, then you do not begin with the best and the highest, but with the worst and the deepest." So yeah, that brings us to the end of this video. I want to thank you a lot for watching this video. If you have any comments, suggestions or questions, then please let me know as well. And in case you're interested in these kind of videos, then please also subscribe to this channel we'll be publishing a new video at least once a week. So thank you again, and I hope to see you in the next video as well.